Hello and welcome to this webinar, How Partial CEP Implementation Can Benefit Your District, hosted by the Food Research and Action Center, or FRAC. I'm Steve Hayward, FRAC's Senior Communications Coordinator. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 30 minutes. However, we're recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides along to you in a follow-up email, so you'll get all the information even if you have to hop off. At the end of the presentation, there will be time for questions and answers. To ask a question, please use the Q&A function on the bottom right of the WebEx screen. With that, I'll pass it off to Nathan Garcia, Emerson National Hunger Fellow at FRAC.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have this webinar to look at how partial CE implementation can benefit your district. With us, we have Lauren from Houston County School Nutrition Program, who is going to be walking us through partial CEP district implementation. As we looked at in a guide that we're putting together, Lauren was very helpful in helping us kind of understand the nuances of how implementing CEP in some schools, but not all of the district, can be really beneficial. And so we're gonna have some questions with Lauren later, but to dive in, we'll go ahead and jump to the next slide. Thank you. So a little bit of background on this webinar and the guide that we're going to be releasing shortly afterwards. We interviewed school nutrition staff to better understand the benefits of implementing CEP partially when the entire district didn't meet the eligibility criteria. Selecting districts that represented different geographic areas and community sizes, we wanted to hear what the experiences and outcomes of partial CEP were. This webinar and a guide that we will send out as a follow-up were based on those conversations. Next slide, please. So what is CEP? As you may know, Community Eligibility Provision allows high-need schools to offer breakfast and lunch to all students at no charge. Any school district, group of schools in a district, or school with 40% or more identified students, which for example are students in households that participate in SNAP or TANF, can choose to participate. Next slide, please. Thank you. So calculating CEP reimbursements is a really important component of this program, and reimbursements are calculated by multiplying the percentage of identified students by 1.6 to determine the percentage of meals that will be reimbursed at the federal free rate. School districts can implement CEP in a single school, a group or groups of schools, or an entire district to participate as long as they have an identified student percentage of 40% or higher to participate. To calculate the claiming percentage, the ISP is multiplied by 1.6 to determine the percentage of meals that will be reimbursed at the free rate. The remaining percentage is reimbursed at the paid rate. There is no reduced price reimbursement rate under community eligibility. Next slide, please. So what we mean by partial implementation allows local education agencies, LEAs, to elect either an individual school, a group of schools, or multiple groups of schools to participate in CEP instead of implementing it district-wide. This is important because it allows LEAs to experience the benefits of CEP in as many schools as possible, even if the district cannot participate district-wide, either due to eligibility or financial viability of implementing it district-wide. LEAs have the discretion to group different schools together to increase the number of students with access to school breakfast and lunch at no charge, and increase the percentage of meals reimbursed at the federal free rate to improve the financial viability of CEP. CEP schools benefit from improvements like increased meal access for students and an easier to implement breakfast after the bell model. Next slide, please. So why districts adopt CEP? And this is really going through some of the benefits that we know all districts experience from CEP. And when districts partially implement CEP, it allows some, at least some of the schools, often schools with the highest rates of needs, to experience the benefits. It removes the district's overall administration's work and helps improve school nutrition finances. So some of the benefits we'll walk through, they're for CEP, but they're definitely applicable for partial CEP schools. We've heard that it creates less administrative work. Schools no longer have to collect and verify school meal applications. It facilitates implementation of innovative breakfast service models. Since schools don't have to collect school meal fees or count each meal served by fee category, it is easier to implement breakfast in the classroom and grab-and-go service models that can boost breakfast participation even further. It improves the financial viability of school nutrition programs. When participation increases, school districts can take advantage of economies of scale and reinvest any additional revenue to improve nutritional quality and provide staff training. It eliminates unpaid meal fees. When all children eat at no charge, the school district does not have to collect school meal fees from families, so families do not accrue school meal debt. It increased participation. Schools in initial pilot states increased breakfast participation by 9.4% and lunch participation by 5.2%, according to a USDA study. And as a result of increased participation, many schools experience the positive effects of having more students who participate. And we know that participating in healthy school meals, has really a lot of positive effects on behavior and learning outcome for students. And that's one of those exciting things that we really have to hold on to, is that when we expand CEP and we provide meals for more students, everyone really gets to benefit, not just the administrative level. Can we go to the next slide, please? So going into grouping a little bit more, grouping schools allows school districts to maximize federal reimbursement and increase the number of schools adopting community eligibility, and supports the financial success of community eligibility. The ISP required for a district to break even varies from district to district. It's important to identify the break-even threshold and build a grouping strategy from there. Here in the table you see below, we have some examples of different schools in elementary, middle, and high school, all with different identified student percentages. And in this example middle school would not be eligible for CEP, but by grouping these three schools together and aggregating their total ISP, we see that this district would be able to serve all three of these schools, implement CEP in them, and have an aggregate percent of 55.8%. And this is really important because grouping strategies can be creative, and districts really have a lot of ability to customize how they decide to group within their district. They can create multiple groups. They can decide to group, across a different age bracket, or group schools despite, geographic locations within their district. So this is a really incredible tool that a lot of different districts utilize in different ways. And, every district knows that is best able to identify their own needs and which percentage is right for them. And next slide, please. So communicating partial CEP is really important. Communication to families about CEP is always important, but even more so in districts that partially implement CEP. Families may have some children attending CEP schools and some attending schools not participating. When children transfer from a CEP school to a non-CEP school, the family must be informed about submitting a household school meal application. For families that are not eligible for free school meals, they need to know that they will be charged for meals. There is some flexibility for families whose children may transfer from a community eligibility school to a non-community eligibility school to ensure that they do not miss out on the much needed free or reduced price meals or accrue school meals as their school meal application is being processed. And we have a link below, and we also have some resources that we're going to share once we send out these slides, that kind of really go into the details in terms of the eligibility manual for CEP. So we'll go ahead and to the next slide. Here are going to be a list of some resources that we put together. We have access to school district report, CEP report, FRAC, CEP grouping, and financial calculator. These are all tools that FRAC has developed to help districts understand their own eligibility and help kind of dive through some of the data. We also have links for the USDA CEP characteristic study and their CEP guidance, which we referenced slightly earlier. All right, and the next slide. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to be diving now into the best part of the webinar, what everyone's here for, kind of listening to the discussions and questions we have with Lauren to understand what CEP implementation looked like in Lauren's district. So everyone, I'd like to introduce you over to Lauren.
Hello, my name is Lauren. I don't know if you want to do this more of a back and forth method or not, but just to tell you a little bit about us, we are Houston County in the almost smack dab in the middle of Georgia. We are a district with just over 30,000 students now. We have 38 locations and 19, exactly half, are CEP sites. We started CEP back before it went nationwide. Georgia was one of the states given the opportunity to try it back when it was community eligibility option, actually. So we took that chance and we started it back in school year 2014. It has always been partial. Our whole district will not qualify, but we definitely have large parts of our county that do. And so we made that decision back in 2013 and haven't gone back.
Lauren, what was your motivation for implementing CEP in part of your district when you first started it?
Okay, so we started with 3 Provision 2 schools prior to CEP, but CEP allowed us to include more of our students, and our goal was always to feed as many children as possible and to provide as many benefits to our students as possible. And so if this was going to allow more students to have meals at no charge and it was still feasible for our program, we saw no reason we shouldn't try to make it happen for as many kids as possible.
That's really great. So how has CEP changed in your district in terms of where it was implemented or how many numbers of schools from when you first started to until now?
Okay, so it's been a story. Like I said, we started with the pilot, and we did that for 2 years before it went nationwide. And we started with 10 schools. We chose, you can rank your schools essentially is what we did based on their ISP and their free and reduced numbers. And we just counted down till we thought we could handle it. And we started very conservative. Those 10 schools, when we originally figured their ISP, it was real close to that 62.5 threshold. Our claiming percentage was somewhere like 99.9 or so. It was up there. We maxed it out. We wanted to make sure it was good to go before we moved any further. By 2016, we added 6 more schools. We learned how we could do it. We learned we were financially stable because your program has to be financially stable in order to keep doing what you do every day, which is feed kids. So we added the 6 more. And with that, we did a big strategic push with administrators and principals and managers, tailored plans, breakfast in the classroom, all of that kind of thing. Because the removal of the cost barrier is great, but if you don't try to implement some other initiatives with it, it can just kind of get lost in the shuffle of everything else that's happening at a school.
Mm.
And that once we did that, that's when we saw participation just go through the roof. Back in 2019, we actually added 3 more to get to our 19 schools, and we added our first high schools. Again, sitting down, like I said, with principals and managers, and they developed a plan tailored to their school based on where kids travel and where the buses drop off and where the car riders come in, what their labor looks like. All of that stuff helps them develop a plan to kind of funnel kids where they can get a meal without even having to really think about it. It just becomes second nature after a while. And so we have held at our 19 since then. Obviously, that was the year we shut down in March of 2020. So we've been all free and rock and rolling with that ever since. But we are looking to return back to our half CEP county come fall. And I definitely know that the people who have seen our list online are very grateful to see that their school is still there. And those will be collecting, of course, free and reduced applications on the rest of them. But that has been our journey.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So what are some of the most notable results that you feel like you've experienced since moving to partial CP in the schools that you've implemented it?
So the first thing is internal. The burden on your staff in your office is significantly lightened. Yes, they're checking DC lists more frequently and all of that. But of course, the number of free and reduced applications you're processing drops way down. Of course, these are your high free and reduced schools anyway. And so that's where the bulk of your applications are even coming from. Second, of course, the families love the benefit. Then the benefit becomes the families don't have to pay for meals. They don't have to think about meals. They don't have to pack them. They don't have to plan for them. They don't have to worry about forgetting to pack them. The mom with 3 kids in the morning who's just trying to get the teenagers out the door. That's a whole different ballgame for them. Then we look at the relationships with the principals and the administration of our county. So the principals, we have our charge policy in place. The principals are not chasing down meal debt. There's no lunch shaming. There's no stigma. There's no reason to differentiate between one kid and the next. We push this out as a benefit to our students. And so the principals are invested in keeping that benefit for their students and keeping that benefit. It benefits them as a school, but it also, they recognize that it benefits their kids. And so they don't want to lose it, which incentivizes them, of course, to help us increase participation, open up a breakfast cart, all of those types of things. They're focused on academics, as they should be. So.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and you really dove into the reduced administrative work. Do you feel like, CEP has impacted your staff to be able to use that time differently? And, have you been able to kind of reinvest any of that time?
Well, personally, I don't actually process free and reduced. We have a rather large central office staff in our district. But their duties can shift to, upgrading technology and claiming systems. And, we can better spend our time investing in procedures that better the way we serve kids rather than focusing on making sure a form has a signature and a last 4 of a social, and is that income weekly or monthly, or you're sitting there trying to figure out all that. And we would much rather be just focusing on the part that we need to do: order food, pay the bills, all of that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. When looking to kind of implement and expand CEP in your district, did you feel like there were any clear obstacles that you had to overcome in order to implement it, or what was that internal process like?
So we didn't really have too many barriers when we first started. It was when we realized we really wanted to push to increase the participation, because with that increased participation, we can add more schools to it, because your reimbursement numbers are going up, your straight numbers, not necessarily your percentage. And when we got administration on board, that really changes things. For us, we went looking out for grant money to help upfront costs. So if you want breakfast carts, you're going to have to pay for them upfront. If you need extra labor to staff those carts in the morning, you're going to have to pay for that before you get your reimbursement claim back. And so you're hedging a bet that this will work. And so we very specifically went looking for grants, and FRAC was one of the partners for Breakfast in the Classroom, which was where we got a significant grant from. And we push that as a benefit. That comes with a whole bunch of PR, and the superintendent loves to see that you're in the news for good things and things like that. But that's when we started enlisting the principals' help for those tailored plans that I was mentioning. After that, the partners requested us to look at increasing access in a paid setting. And I know this is about CEP, but what came out of the paid setting is we were able to track students' individual data. When you do CEP breakfast, we're doing tally counters. And so I can't tell that Sally ate lunch on Tuesday and I'm going to compare that to her test scores. I can't do that anymore. We're able to do that with the paid model. And so when we came out of that, we were able to then present to the principals, we have seen this result for academics, we have seen this result for discipline, we have seen this result for attendance. And when you start doing that, you're speaking their language. They want to know what's in it for them. And so if you start talking about all of those benefits, oh my gosh, I don't have to spend half my day dealing with discipline problems. That's great. Oh my gosh, my test scores are going to go up 2%. I'm evaluated on that. I need that. And so then we had principals starting to go, oh, how do we do this in our school? Because increasing access is going to be great for my kids. And they don't necessarily want to hear we need 95% participation and things like that. That's not their lingo. But when you start speaking in their terms, they get excited about what they can do for their school building.
Yeah, that's really exciting. That is very cool. I'm curious, we talked briefly at one of the slides about communicating partial CEP to student families and partners. What does your communication strategy look like in your district?
So we use several different methods. We do have a slight social media presence. Most of it's on Facebook. So does our district. We have a website set up with the list of schools and what CEP is. And it's there constantly for them to be able to look at. And we're reaching out every year to let people know, these are the schools that eat at no cost. And you can at the outset have a little bit of that, I guess, hesitancy or fear of you're going to get feedback and comments and pushback about why is my kid's school not on the list? And there is a reason. It's a formula. It's all logic. You're looking at math and you can go down the list and at some point you're going to have to cut it off because that's what happens. But, there is money set aside for federal tax dollars that is going to feed kids regardless. And you may as well have it come to your community and your district because that just betters your district as a whole. Whether or not it's in, your backyard, it's in the neighbor's backyard.
Yeah, that's pretty great. Do you have any, kind of opening it up a little bit before we're gonna, look and see if there's any questions in the chat that we can dive through. But I'm curious to hear if you have any other tips or, recommendations for other districts that regarding implementing CEP at some but not all of their schools.
Yeah, so we make sure, like I said, that these correspond to anything else that's need-based. And make sure that there's a logical sense to it. Now there's an emotional component that says, I want my kid to have free meals. But when I look at numbers, I go, oh, that's why my kid's school doesn't have free meals. So there's a formula and you can kind of use that as a fallback, but it's no different to us than Title I. So Title I, part of our district has about half of our schools are Title I and the other half are not. And we don't make that determination. It's a formula and here it is. And people are relatively accepting of that. They understand that. And so once you get past that initial, hey, why isn't it my kid? It kind of fades away and it's routine and everybody knows that that's what it is. It fades quickly.
That's great. That's encouraging. That's really exciting. And I also want to let everyone that's joining us know that with us we have Crystal, who's the director of school and out of school time programs at FRAC. Crystal's already been, great in jumping into the chat for us. But if there are any questions that you might have, go ahead and please put them in the chat below, and we're going to see if we can get to them today. So right out of the gate, we have a couple questions. Maybe you can help us clear up, Lauren. Someone did ask, who in your district collects income surveys from the CEP schools?
So we do have a piece of paper in like a registration packet at our central registration office that collects data where they can check if they put, if they receive food stamps or if they're on TANF or things like that. But we are not allowed to collect free and reduced applications on the CEP schools. So it is our office, I mentioned reduced burden, but they still do have to check DC lists that come from the state and match everything periodically. And they do that several times. I think they come out almost once a month with the list and updates and things like that. And so we look at that every year to see if our percentage has gone up at all. And hopefully well, not necessarily hopefully it has, but if it has, we can recertify and increase our claiming percentage a little bit based on that. I hope that answers that question.
We had another question.
Nathan, can I jump in on that too really quick?
Please, yeah, I would love that.
Oh, sure. So there are some states where it is required that the school districts collect an alternative form. Not every state requires it. And there's been a lot of flexibility provided by the U.S. Department of Education to kind of overcome some of the concerns about losing school meal applications for Title I sources and other education funding sources. So I would just say that not every school district has to collect these forms. If you are in a state where you do have to collect the forms, that collection process can be done by the school nutrition staff, but it doesn't have to be, and it can't be charged to the school nutrition account. And then the other piece I just wanted to lift up is that because you're not certifying kids for free or reduced price school meals, you have more flexibility in what the application actually looks like. So just wanted to flag that. So not everybody who's on this call today will have to collect alternative forms, and you should check in with your state to see if that is a requirement.
Sorry about that. Georgia does not.
You're very lucky. I would say it's about 50-50 for the state.
We appreciate that.
We did get another question. As someone asked, what about applications from siblings, some in CEP schools and others not in CEP schools? And how would that be handled? So
we do still take an application for someone that would attend a non-CEP school and a sibling does not, and a sibling does attend a CEP school because we would like to certify that kid as well. I would say to refer to your state department on that. Again, I'm not the one in the office who actually processes the free and reduced applications, but we do take them if that student is not enrolled in a CEP school and it gets entered under that student and not the sibling. That said, it is beneficial, and for the most part, our CEP schools feed into one another. So if someone's zoned for one of our CEP schools, when we added the high school especially, it is helpful that anyone in that house is going to attend whatever grade it's zoned for a CEP school. I think we've only got like a handful where they don't, because of the way our district has zoning, where they don't quite match up. But I also know I grew up in a district where feeder schools were entirely contained in the high school. And so if you got the high school certified, like if that were your grouping, you could think about that when you do grouping and things like that. to help minimize that situation.
Wow, that's really great. You know, I think we're about wrapping up right here at 3:30. You know, I have one other question if we can maybe touch on someone asking how Title I percentages determined if there are no income surveys.
We do not handle Title I percentages. I cannot actually speak to that, I don't believe. We have a separate office that handles Title I. I know our director, when we first did CEP, spent a lot of time talking to that office and making sure, you know, the superintendent was emphatic that it not affect the Title I funding significantly. And it didn't throw it off. I think there were small tweaks and changes, but for the most part, it was pretty smooth. It didn't break the bank. It didn't go one way or the other significantly.
Yeah, and that does get back to what I mentioned earlier about the U.S. Department of Education putting out guidance on how to deal with Title I if you no longer collect school meal applications. And there are flexibilities there for community eligibility schools. You could use the identified student percentage times 1.6 to make it comparable to the other schools. You could use Medicaid data. There's flexibilities there. We do have a link to the Title I guidance on our website and a Q&A to it as well. So the slide that Nate showed, which I think it was frac.org/community eligibility, or even if you just Google it, you can find those resources around Title I to help with making those determinations.
Yeah, I think we use the ISP times the multiplier times the 1.6. I think that is how our office does it, because when we look at free and reduced percentages, it's that shows up. I mentioned, just for reference, when we started, we were at like 99, 97% free claiming. We're now down under 85 and we're still doing okay. So don't be afraid.
That's really great. We have a lot of thank yous in the chat, and you know, Lauren and Crystal, I want to thank you both. Lauren, thank you so much for sharing with us your experience and your expertise, and thank you both for helping answer these questions. So, you know, with that, if anyone has any other questions, they can reach out. We're going to be sending out this presentation, the slides, and along with our partial CEP implementation guide as a follow-up. But if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us.